I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of several books, no other than Mr. Alastair Henry. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Henry, and can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, a beautiful morning. My name is Alastair Henry. I'm an author. I'm an audiobook narrator. I'm a podcast guest, like I am this morning, talking to Daniel. And I'm a double lung transplant recipient, which is very odd, but very, very important, obviously, in my life, because if I wasn't, I wouldn't be talking to you this morning.
Definitely, Mr. Henry. So tell us about migrating from United Kingdom to Canada.
Yeah, I've had a very interesting life. None of it was planned. It just happened. Um, I was I was 19. I was playing in a rock band, same time as the Beatles and the Stones in Britain. I fell in love, and my girlfriend said, "I'm going to Canada. My parents are emigrating." Well, I was so in love. I went home and I said to my parents, "I'm going to Canada." They were devastated. They said, "You've got to be joking." I said, "Nope." And I did. 4 months later, by myself, I went to Canada. And in those days, that was 1963. There was no Googling, doing search. I came to Canada for my girlfriend, not for anything in Canada, but I'm glad I did because I've had a wonderful life. So anyway, I got married, had 3 children, and joined the corporate world, worked my ass off, did very well, and I was able to retire at 57. And that to me was I was a success. I'd been successful because all my colleagues were all yuppies, and that's what we figured. It meant to be success to retire early. In fact, London Life, an insurance company, had a program called Freedom 55. And the whole idea was if you followed their plan, you could retire at 55. Well, I retired at 57 and I got this beautiful place out in the country, idyllic, 50 acres, 5 ponds, river running through the property. But Daniel, 2 years later, I was asking myself, is this it? I'm only 57. Is, is this all I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Play golf, cut grass? And it felt empty. I didn't feel fulfilled. I thought I got to do something. So I didn't want to go back in the corporate world. Didn't want to go back in the city. Been there, done that. I wanted, I wanted something totally different. I wanted an adventure, and I found it in the Northwest Territories. I went to live with a small band of First Nations people on the east arm of Great Slave Lake, a little fly-in location. It was amazing, really exactly what I was looking for. And I was there for 2 years, and the different culture, different climate, worldview, it totally changed my the way I looked at the world because I
Co-
came from this corporate background.
yes. Congratulations, Mr. Henry. You found
Yeah,
your joy in life.
I did. And you know what the joy was, Daniel? It was helping people. Because in the corporate world, all I did was, it was all boardrooms, meetings, budgets, reports. I really wasn't working with anybody. I had colleagues, but, the nature of the work was all business. Whereas in Lutz when I went, people invited me to their homes. I went checking Tommy's trap lines. I went fishing. I found my community. And that was the thing, you see. Only 300 people, And no subdivisions. They all live, basically in one place. Great big community hall, and they did everything together. And that's what I discovered. I enjoy people. I enjoy community. And when I left there 2 years later, I thought this is what I want to do. I can take all my, because when I was 59 and living in the country, I was thinking to myself, like I've worked all these years, I've accumulated all these skills and experience, like for what? What are you going to do? Just forget about it? So I thought, no, I can use them. I can use all that lot. So I went to Dhaka, Bangladesh by myself to volunteer with a small NGO who was setting up microcredit programs. And they really helped the abjectly poor. And I did that for 2 years. It was a 2-year contract. And that was wonderful. Yeah, but
Yes.
I was writing. I wrote about my experience in the Northwest Territories. It ended up to be an autobiography. It's called Awakening in the Northwest Territories. And then with my wife, who I met when I came back from Bangladesh, we co-wrote Go For It, back volunteering adventures on roads less traveled, to encourage retirees to think about, sharing their skills. Because I realized when I was all done, I retired in the country. To all intents and purposes, that was it. I was done. I never thought about volunteering. I always considered, I'd have to be paid to use my skills and knowledge. But then I discovered no, volunteering is a joy. You can do it. And if you don't get paid, it when you get paid, it's not the same. But when you do it just out of goodness, if you like, there's a joy that comes to you, satisfaction from helping, trying to make a difference in the world. So with Candace, she sold up everything. She liked what I was doing. And we went off together to Kingston, Jamaica for a year to work with the NGOs with the youth in Kingston, Jamaica. And then we went to Georgetown, Guyana, same thing. And we wrote about all of our adventures there in this book I mentioned.
What an adventure, Mr. Henry. What age did you realize that you are good in writing?
Well, Daniel, believe it or not, it all started when I went to Lutzoke. My daughter gave me a journal. And she said, write in this, Dad, because I want to know what it's like up there. I know it's going to be very different. So I started to write out of a sense of obligation because I figured, she's going to be saying, how's the writing coming, Dad? And I didn't want to say, well, I'll start one day. So I thought, I better start. But so much was happening, Daniel. Every day there was, amazing stuff, you know. Uh, so I started writing and writing and writing. I finished the journal and then I was writing in notebooks. So at the end, in 2 years, I had all these notebooks, and about 8 notebooks. And I thought, I can't just turn these over to my daughter and say, here, read this. It really wasn't readable. So I thought I got to do something with all of this. I got to condense it, make it readable. So what I did, I went to a little town in Costa Rica called Coweta on the border with Panama. I rented a guest house, and every day I put all that stuff into Microsoft Word, and then I started to work through it. And as I worked through it, I thought, I had about 350,000 words, which is like War and Peace. It's. But I started going through it, and I thought, okay, I can get rid of this. That doesn't go anywhere. That's. But I noticed there was little threads of a story. The things were happening in Lutzoke. So I kept those, and it ended up to be about 100,000 words. I called it White Man on the Land. And it was about when I went to Lutzoke and when I left. So I passed the book around. Everybody really enjoyed it. And they said, you know what, though? The reader is going to want to know more about who was this guy that went to Lutzow, and what did he do afterwards? So I carried on writing, and I went all the way back, and it was my life. So it turned out to be an autobiography. So that's how I became an author, believe it or not. Another thing we did, Candace and I, when we came back after we finished our assignments, our volunteering, and we came back to Canada, moved in with our kids because we were homeless. We'd sold our homes and everything. And we thought, this isn't right. We can't just impose ourselves on our kids like this. I mean, they've got a life. This is so disruptive. So we decided to go backpacking as if we were 20 years old, even though we were like 67, 68. So we went to Central America for 4 months with just a backpack, just 25 pounds. And we went through Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua. And when we were in the top of Nicaragua on our way to Guatemala, we got a call, and it was the volunteer sending agency again, with 2 wonderful opportunities in Georgetown, Guyana. So we came back to Canada, packed up, and went to Guyana. And then after Guyana, we did the same thing. We said, we had such an amazing holiday experience backpacking. Let's do it again. We went to Southeast Asia. So we went to Bali, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. And people were saying, wow, you've got to be rich, And we said, So that's when we decided we'd better write a book to show them how they can do it on a shoestring. So it's called Budget Backpacking for Boomers. And we show where we went, where we stayed, what we paid. And we did it all. Between us, we had $80 a day. That's all. And it was enough. It was enough for accommodation, food, and local travel.
Interesting, Mr. Henry.
That was that. And then we became entertainers because we put our books, because they were true, right? We had all of these photographs and stories. So we put it all into like a big PowerPoint. So for 5 years, we went to retirement residences, community centers, presenting our shows based on each of our books. And then what happened is my wife got breast cancer, so that stopped that. And then in 2016, I began writing a book. I wanted to write a book about my memories about growing up in England, because I realized the world had changed so much. When I was growing up in England, it was just after the war. Areas of Bolton were still bombed out. There was craters. There was a lot of World War II vets wandering around town with PTSD because there was no mental health help for them. And they were scary characters as kids, man. They scared the living hell out of us because they had all of these little, ways about them. Anyway, I decided I'd write a book about that, and then I became aware of another program. It was called the Home Children Program. Canada, England sent over 100,000 children to Canada because Canada had a labor shortage, and this 100,000 kids came from orphanages and homes, and they were all under the age of 13. They were all sent without their consent to work on farms for 5 years. So I thought, I'm going to incorporate this in my book, The Soldier and the Orphan, to make people aware, Canadians aware, of
Yes.
these programs that the government got involved in. Just like the residential program, it wasn't taught in schools. Most people weren't aware until there was all of this publicity about it. And it's the same thing with the Home Children Program. So I made that a central part of my book. So anyway, let's carry on there. I started writing in 2016. I got the story down, but I only had about 50,000 words. It's just the way I do it. I map the story out. It's just like, you take a piece of stone and you start carving, but later you go back and you carve out the the eyelids and the lips, you know. So I hadn't got down to that in my book. I just had this skeleton of the story. And then I was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a very with a high mobility of 3 to 5 years. And I was
Mm.
given, so I said, well, where am I? Have I got 3 years or 5 years? And they said, well, unfortunately, your fibrosis is quite advanced. You're looking at 18 months. And, that right there, Daniel, I realized, we're all going to die, right? None of
Yes.
us, we're all going to die. And we all have a best before date, but we just don't know when it is. And we don't want to think about it. But we do. We all have a
Yes.
best before date. But all of a sudden, I got my best before date, June 2020. I had like 18 months to do whatever, and then that was it. So, and the thing was, I wasn't upset. I just accepted it. It's part of life. You're born, you live, you die. We all die. And I just accepted it. And I thought, okay, I've had a good life. So that's great. But anyway, what happened is my children insisted I look into the possibility of having a lung transplant. Now, the doctor never mentioned it to me. I went to him
Mm.
and I said,
Yes.
hey, what about a lung transplant? Is that a possibility? He said, well, usually for people over 70, because I was 75 at the time, he said they've got complicating problems. They got diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart. But we could check you out. Chances are you've got one of those things. Anyway, check me out, and I was fine. So I went on the wait list in June 2020. On September 3rd, I came out of Toronto General Hospital with a new pair of lungs. And that's 3 years ago. So
Okay.
I carried on writing my book. Wonderful, eh? So this gift of life, this second chance at life, I thought, well, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to do things with it. And one of the things was to bring my book, The Soldier and the Orphan, to give it a life. So I finished writing it. I put it on Amazon, and now I'm talking to you about it. How wonderful is that?
That'd be awesome, Mr. Henry. But before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening in Namibia. Thank you, Namibia, for supporting this podcast because in commas, I get 70% audience share. Oh, Mahiki at 20% and Irango at 10%. Again, Namibia, thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world like Mr. Alastair Henry. The soldier and the orphan, separated by church and war. How did you crafted it, Mr. Henry?
Well, as I say, I had these early childhood memories from England. I had my own memories. I came to Canada by myself when I was 19. I used a lot of my own experiences and memories, and that's why the book has a feel of authenticity about it because it's not just fiction. The people in the book, I knew these people. Well, I knew people, and I used their my memory of their personality and stuff, to bring them to life. So it's a very people have said it's a very heartwarming book.
Yes. What
Yeah.
behind the title, Soldier and the Orphan?
Well, it's about two boys, identical twins, born to an unwed mother in 1921 in England, when such a thing was a disgrace. The Catholic Church intervened and wanted to put both boys into an orphan. Well, Mary, the mother, insisted, so she kept one child, but Billy didn't know he had a brother. And the other boy, Tommy, was put into an orphanage, and he was not allowed to know anything about his parentage. So they go through life not aware that they have a twin brother until later somebody tells them, and that changes the whole life. So Billy gets injured in the war in France, and he comes home and he's got PTSD. He's homeless. He's a tramp, but an old friend befriends him and gives him a job and a house, and that turns Billy's life around. Tommy, Tommy, as I say, is the orphan. He gets shipped to Canada, and they end up actually in a little island, one of the Channel Islands in Jersey, because my parents were from Jersey. So, and it was like during the German occupation. So there's a lot of geographic history in the book, which makes it very rich reading because it covers a lot of important eras in the world at different times.
So, Mr. Henry, what inspired you to write this latest book?
Well, I had these memories of growing up, and I thought, they would make a good story because the world has changed, and I'd like to write about how it was. It was very difficult for working class people in England in the 1920s. They were they were working class, so they were put upon. You know, the upper wealthier people were very rough on them. For instance, the stance by the church about unwed mothers. There was no compassion. It was brutal. The sins of the father, being foisted on the children. So that's a central theme in my book, is fighting the the church and the state because they were so hard on working class people.
Yes, definitely. Before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the best restaurants in downtown Toronto. Please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about truffles, people, one of the expensive ingredients in the kitchen, or they call the black diamond in the kitchen. So please do listen. Food 101 plus one more. Our books are out, not only one but 8 volumes, people. Food 101 volume 1 basics is all you need, how to create a delicious food. Our volume 8 is called Chinese cuisine, people, available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Henry, what is the best highlight of The Soldier and the Orphan?
I think it's the end. It has a happy ending. It'll make you cry. It's a very emotive book. It's a very uh, high emotion, fast. It moves along. Many people say they couldn't put it down because they had to keep reading because it just compelled them to find out, well, what happens next, and it never stops. But
Yes.
the good thing is, it's one of those good reads. You finish it and you feel satisfied because it has a happy ending.
So, Mr. Henry, what are your short term and long term goals in writing?
And just really to market this book, and my other books, they're very different, because one's an autobiography, three are memoirs. This is a historical fiction romance. So I just talk about my books wherever.
Yes.
I'm 79, so I don't really have any great ambitions in life to, do anything else except just I enjoy writing my books. And of course, we write them for people to read. So we have to make people aware that the books are available. And that's why I'm talking with you this morning.
So, Mr. Henry, at the age of 79, what the meaning of life?
The meaning of life is basically to help wherever you can, to share your knowledge and skills Um, here's the thing, Daniel. What I realized when I was in Bangladesh, I mean, they're so poor, they've got nothing, but they're happy. They were smiling, they were whistling, they were singing. And it dawned on me, how can they do this? They got shit, they got nothing. And then I realized happiness is a state of mind. It isn't what you have. And that, because in my world, I was brought up to be successful. So I question that. What the hell is success if you're not happy? And I thought back to lots of successful people that weren't happy. And I thought, wow, you know, they were strutting around thinking they're successful. But what's the point if you're not happy? So I realized happiness is about sharing. It's just about sharing your life with other people and the importance of community. Because in Bangladesh, that's where they have, like the rickshaw driver, he has no aspirations to be anything else. His father was a rickshaw driver, so was his granddad. He just accepts that's what he does in life. He's a rickshaw driver. But when he goes home at night, he goes to his kids and his wife and his grandparents who look after the grandkids. That's where the happiness is, it's community. And I
Yes.
realized that in my world, I never had that. In my world, we're all independently working away hard at succeeding, whatever that means. So there you go.
Interesting and very well said, Mr. Henry. The soldier and the orphan. What do you think? Something missing that you did not put in the story.
No, I can't think of anything. I can't think. I think it's a very complete novel. I think for your readers, it's going to take them. It takes them from England to Canada, to the Channel Islands. So it's a really multifaceted journey and characters, lots of characters, strong characters. No, I think
So,
it's complete. I think when the reader finishes the book, they're going to say, "Wow, that was a good read."
according to Miss Pearlie, the soldier and the orphan documents an important period of Canadian history. So, what are the preparation in writing Soldier and the Orphan, Mr. Henry?
Well, I had to do some research about the home children, and when you do the research and then there's a sort of authenticity comes out if you're writing rather than using imagination. So I read a lot of accounts from these home children, what it was like on the farm, like they weren't accepted because because they didn't know who their parents were. So there was a lot of concern. There was what do you call it, discrimination. There was a feeling that they you couldn't trust them. They'd steal, they'd rape, so they were avoided like the plague. So a lot of these kids, could you imagine 13 years of age coming across on a boat to Canada, going to a farm somewhere, pig farm, chicken farm, and you weren't even allowed to come in the house. You had to live in the barn. I mean, less than human. They figure 10% committed suicide out of a sense of hopelessness and despair because, life it was nothing. Now, some of them, most of them did have a happy. In my book, I write it's Tommy, Eddie, and Charlie. Three of them come out from England. Tommy has a good life, and Eddie and Charlie not so much. So, in my book, I show the readers, another side of the coin to do with his home children program, and the government's never apologized for their part in the scheme. And the problem was, you see, Canada in 1910, 1920, they had all these immigrants coming over, developing farms and whatever, but they had no labor for harvest. They had a real shortage, and they were building these beautiful big homes, but they were short of domestics to look after the children, do the cooking, the cleaning, polish the woodwork, the fireplace. So a lot of these kids, this is exactly what they did. They were only 8 or 9 when they came out, but they were put to work as slaves. It was just another form of slavery. And it was because England, you could. These kids were all from orphans and homes. Nobody cared. So that's why they decided to do that.
Very well said, Mr. Henry, and interesting indeed. The soldier and the orphan separated by church and war. Can you please invite our listeners to buy your book?
Absolutely. And if your listeners just Google alastairhenry.com, they can go up on there and they can read excerpts, read reviews, lots of stuff, lots of information. And obviously, where to buy the books. It'll take you to links on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But that would be the good place to read a lot of stuff.
Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Henry, what is your inspiring word for those aspiring writers out there?
I would say, like I'm not a science fiction or horror writer. For me, I think write what you know. So for me, the soldier and the orphan, there's so much of me in there, growing up in England, in Bolton, what it was like. Because I think there's an authenticity that shines off the pages when you write what you know. Um, and without knowing it, I think it pulls the reader in because it says to the reader, yeah, this writer knows what he was talking about. You know, it's just more believable when you do that.
Definitely. Mr. Henry, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, listeners, for my latest score of 26 and belong to 10% popular show globally. And of course, FeedSpot for being the number 7 best art book podcast need to follow this 2023. Thank you so much. Barcon people, see you soon.